All right, we're live. Hi, I'm Klaus Sailors. I'm the CEO of Family Promise, and welcome to Klaus in 60 Seconds live on Facebook. And it's been a few weeks, about a month since we've been on because we've been retooling. We started Klaus in 60 Seconds a number of years ago, and it literally at that time was 60 seconds. It was me talking for 60 seconds about some issue related to family homelessness. Family Promise is the leading national organization addressing the issue of family homelessness. Then we switched to a Facebook Live format where I had conversations with people, and they were fantastic. I just have had so much fun talking to such amazing people about issues that touch all sectors of the work that we do. And then we decided we're going to take this to another iteration. So this is the new format for Facebook Live, Klaus in 60 Seconds live on Facebook. We're going to have different segments, go deeper into some of the issues and really look at more of the implications, highlight affiliates. Still going to have interviews, and I'm excited about my interviewee for today. And I want to just do a couple of shout outs. One is to our incredible communications team. That's Mitch, Cassidy, Katie, Munisa, Monique, Kara, Melissa. They do this. This is a small sliver of what they do. They do our incredible communications across all these platforms about the issues of family homelessness, about the important actions that we need to take, about the crisis this country faces by not making sure that families are stably housed. They are incredible and they do terrific work. And the other shout out I want to do is to my childhood best friend, John Dowley, who composed the theme song for our show here. And this is John and I a couple of years ago. Now, John is a lawyer. He is a brilliant musician, multi-instrumentalist. He's a producer. He recorded that, created that piece, wrote it, played all the parts, and let me use it. John and I were in a band together in high school. I played rhythm guitar. He played lead guitar. John had incredible talent and used that to take him where he is today. I had an incredible lack of talent, and that's why I'm the CEO of Family Promise. So with that, we're going to move on to our next segment. All right. So we're going to be talking about emergency rental assistance, right? It's part of ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. And a little bit of a set on this, all right, a level set on this. Emergency rental assistance is $47 billion that is being given to help families, to help households avoid eviction. And the reason why it exists is that the pandemic created a K-shaped recession. So one arm of the K, the one that went up, were the people who were able to successfully work from home. So their stock portfolios grow, really may have felt different impacts of the pandemic, but didn't feel an economic impact. That's a pretty large segment of the population. But there's another large segment of the population that was in the downward slope of the K-shaped recession. They were the ones that were frontline workers, hourly workers, typically lower income workers, more predominantly people of color, who were severely affected by the economic impacts of the pandemic as well as the health impacts too. So the American Rescue Plan identified $47 billion to help them with their housing costs. At the same time, we had an eviction moratorium in place that meant that people would not get evicted so that we could get this money out, get the back rent and front rent paid, and keep people stably housed. The moratorium was created in September of last year specifically because we saw the incredible health implications of allowing evictions to happen on a large scale. It would have been disastrous for the country on a health level. Of course, it would be disastrous on many other levels. So all of that is why we have this. But the challenge that we have before us is fantastic that there's this $47 billion. But as of the end of July, only 11% of that had gone out and paid for people's rent. And once the moratorium was struck down by the Supreme Court at the end of August, we faced this really bitter irony of we had all this money out, the mass majority of it hadn't gone out, and you had families and households at the risk of eviction. And that really creates a crisis situation. Now, a little bit more detail on this. 53% of Americans live now in communities where there is no eviction prevention. There are some local, state, and community preventions for eviction, which are fantastic. But 53% of Americans are not in such communities. 3.5 million renters believe they're at risk of eviction in the next 2 months, and 60% of those live in those areas without protection. And ultimately, I think a couple of other really important points to this. The way that the ERAP, eviction rental assistance, emergency rental assistance, was set up was that each state could implement it in the ways that it saw fit. That meant that many states created new systems, ignored sort of local competencies on this. They created eligibility requirements that were often quite extreme. And I want to talk about this for a moment, because typically government subsidies for people with wealth, things like income tax deductions and so on, are not means tested, right? You can do that. Now, if you're relying on it, that you can be caught and prosecuted for it, but you're not asked to prove that you can get those subsidies. But when you're looking at subsidies for people who are poor, who are in poverty, they're means tested. There's all of these obstacles, there's all these things that must be proved, often to the point that it just was virtually impossible for families to successfully apply for emergency assistance. Add to that, many states did it only online. 13 million rental households in this country do not have Wi-Fi access. So there are many ways that the system was stacked against families. That being said, some states have done an amazing job of getting that money out, of creating protections for families and for landlords, because we have an ecosystem. We don't want to see landlords suffering either, because they're providing the housing. Many landlords are struggling as well. Then there's states that have just done, frankly, I think, an abysmal job of it. So we're going to look at all these different implications. And my guest today is an absolutely incredible woman, Sadie Keller. She is the Family Promise Policy and Program Associate. She is an expert on all things related to policy, all things related to prevention and diversion programming, which are so critical in all of this. And she is going to enlighten us a lot on some of the further implications of emergency rental assistance. Hey, Sadie.
Hey, Klaus. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. How's Somerville, Massachusetts doing?
Somerville, Massachusetts is doing really well. And I'm really glad it's Friday, but I'm also just really excited to be on the show with you. Thank you for having me. It
is an absolute pleasure. You are just awesome. So, I gave my preamble. Is there anything you want to add to that, to what I said before we sort of jump into questions? Any other points you think are important to make?
I love the way you frame the whole issue and the whole kind of moment that we find ourselves in. It is truly astounding to me when I think about just 11% of rental assistance having actually reached families and landlords. And of course, some states have done a really, really phenomenal job. State of Massachusetts, Texas, New Jersey. But like you said, we have a major problem on our hands, and it's impacting the families that we serve.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Again, I mean, I think and there's such simple things that we could have put in place, even in those states that have been inefficient on this, just creating requirements that you cannot evict if families have made their application, or you have to inform families. Because this is a really important data point too, is that fewer than 50% of rental households were aware of the ERAP program, and not much more of individual investor landlords, right? Mom and pop landlords, right? The person that owns a couple buildings. I think it's less than 60% of them knew this program existed. So there's just some fundamental challenges here. So the first question I'm going to ask you, what are the likely consequences, or what have been the consequences of this kind of pace and method of rollout? What are your meta thoughts on that?
So I've thought about it kind of in two ways. So catching up on rent for a family is nearly impossible. And when you're behind on rent, you have to make trade-offs and sacrifices that no family should have to make, deciding which bill gets paid first, which school fee gets paid first, what meals put on the table. Those are the types of trade-offs that way too many millions of American families are making right now because of the overturning of the eviction moratorium and this lack of kind of assistance being given to families. And then on the sort of operational and meta level, it's hard for states to catch up. So if a state starts this ERAP program at a slow pace, it's really hard. And a lot of data shows that there's sort of a funnel and a lot of backlog that's happening in states that started slowly. So it's hard for families to catch up on rent, and it's hard for states to catch up on ERAP distribution. That's kind of my big takeaway.
And so you're talking about some of these challenges, and part of the issue here is that the ERA program, ARPA overall, I think is terrific legislation to protect households and bring resources out. We know that it was sort of set up in January with nothing, right? So the administration just had to basically build this from scratch. There was no infrastructure for it. But there's only so much that they can do. It really is on the state level. So let me ask you this question sort of in two ways, right? What are the opportunities for improvements? And if you were in charge of a state that was not doing such a good job, like South Carolina, for example, comes to mind, or Florida, what would you change? What would you institute? How would you make this better?
So opportunities for improvement, we've got plenty of those. One of the big conversations that people have been having, and you mentioned this when you framed the issue earlier in the segment, is the heavy documentation requirements and length of the application itself. So of course it varies state by state, but in general, a lot of families are really struggling to actually fill out the applications. And what a lot of Family Promise affiliates are doing, and what case managers across the country are doing, is really sitting with a family and walking them through what is a very lengthy and cumbersome application process. And that application process also requires a lot of documentation. I don't know where my driver's license is right now, but if you can imagine, it's hard to keep these documents in order just in general. And if you're
maybe 6 things, including like past bills, which
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And if you're a family who's faced housing instability, when you move a lot, things get misplaced or lost or stolen, and that's actually a huge issue that a lot of families face when it comes to these applications. So one of the improvements, one of the proposals is a piece of legislation that Representative Maxine Waters introduced to the House. And it's looking like it's had a lot of support on the House floor. And what this legislation would do, it's called the Expediting Assistance to Renters and Landlords Act, which is a great title because it tells us exactly what we need to know. What this would do is actually ensure that if a family has applied for ERAP, they cannot be evicted while their applications are pending. And the other thing it allows landlords to do is apply on behalf of a tenant. And there's some criticism and concern about that and the oversight attached to it. But those are two really important ideas that have been brought to the table. And then another thing I want to mention, just with the sort of improvements piece, there's a growing support for what's called self-attestation, which means that a individual or family can claim legally that they have had hardship due to COVID-19 and therefore, are eligible for this ERAP assistance. It has been pushed by the Fed and by the federal government to allow self-attestation, but it's not actually mandated and it's not required that agencies, the state of Massachusetts or New Jersey allow that. And so that's what this piece of legislation would enact as well. And then, my thoughts, I certainly, I don't have an easy kind of, this is what I would do 1, 2, 3, but one thing I would do in a state that's struggling is ensure that the application and all of the outreach materials are available in the languages of the communities that live in that state. That's been a major issue. And we also just need more like operational strength and capacity at these state and local government offices. Employees just can't get through the applications fast enough and get the funding out the door. So we have to really invest in those state and local offices as well.
Thank you for that, Sadie. And I think added to the self-attestation too is that you can do a lot of mapping on zip codes, right? Because there's zip codes that tell you overwhelmingly the likelihood of the income level and the impact of COVID on jobs and so on, right? You can map those things. We have all these fantastic analytics. Let's use that in this way. And again, as I said in my intro, we worry so much about oversight. Of course, oversight's important. And of course, you're going to have people that abuse systems, but you have remedies for that. When we look at wealth, the remedies are, right, prosecution and so on, rather than putting up all of these barriers at the upfront that just it spread more of this misery around. So there's a lot of different government rollouts of assistance. How can you place this among all of them? How is this distinct from other assistance cycles?
So this is definitely not the first, and it won't be the last kind of assistance cycle from the federal government, but this is a really big one. And part of the thing that makes this distinct is the decentralization that we've been talking about. And I think, one of the lessons for me of the last 2 years has been when you live in the United States and each state does things a little bit differently, that means that mask mandates and eviction moratoria and ERAP distribution are going to vary state by state. And when we're talking about, something like housing or public health, what happens in Massachusetts does impact what happens in Connecticut. So, we have to kind of balance our need for a federalist system and our need to take care of the common good, right? But one of the kind of parallel examples that I wanted to highlight is the child tax credit, because that's been going on at the same time. It's actually a really successful and really amazing program that has been pushed by the federal government. And you've done a lot of advocacy around the child tax credit. It is, data shows that it is making serious headway in reducing the child poverty rate in this country. And that is putting money in people's pockets and letting them decide what to do with it. Because time and time again, yes, we need oversight, and yes, we need to make sure that funds are being appropriately used. But I really believe, and I know that more and more people are starting to believe that if you give a family direct assistance and let them decide what to do with it, they will do what they need and they will do what's best for their family. And they'll use the funds, in this case, for rent. So I do think that this is a distinct kind of rollout experience, but I think there are a lot of lessons to be gained, and hopefully, we don't make some of these mistakes again.
Yep, no, I agree. I mean, again, we don't concern ourselves with the fact that somebody uses their income tax deductions to buy themselves, a solid gold paperweight, as opposed to, we're not, you never see. It reminds me of, you see specials about families getting, poor families getting money and spending it. We never do specials about, we never do news stories about wealthy families buying food for their kids and clothes, right? Some things are just universal, and you kind of create this otherness, as opposed to people generally motivated to make their lives better by addressing their basic needs for their children and families. Absolutely. So the last question is, what are our affiliates doing right? And I want to preface this with, I've seen across the country such amazing work that our affiliates are doing. They've been so just valiant in their defense of families' ability to have housing. So what are some of the things that they're doing right?
I think it's really important to end on this note because, for me personally, in my role, I get to talk to case managers and executive directors around the country, and it is amazing. It has been so inspiring, and truly some of the most, capable and caring people are in our Family Promise network. And frankly, if one of them were organizing the ERAP program for their state or this country, we'd probably be in better hands. But some affiliates that I think deserve particular shout outs. So I have to say Family Promise of Union County first, because on top of effectively and efficiently distributing so much ERA to families in need in their prevention programs, and to families who have not before contacted Family Promise, they've also been dealing with really intense ramifications of flooding in their area and their day centers. So I've been amazed by the work that they've done. Family Promise of Morris County has been doing this and doing it really well. Another affiliate that I think is really exciting because it touches on sort of the eviction piece as well. Family Promise, our affiliate in Juneau, is actually partnering with the local eviction court system, so that when a family is brought to eviction court and an eviction is filed against them, the affiliate is immediately contacted and provides ERA assistance if the family qualifies, which is this perfect sort of combination of the existing funds and, you know, giving it to families who need it the most. So there are a lot more examples out there, but those are three I have to mention.
Awesome. Sadie, thank you so much. Thank you for the incredible work you do. You know, you are just such an important piece of the success affiliates have across the country. You've done so much to promote prevention and diversion among affiliates and give the affiliates the top level information and skills to really apply those incredibly effectively. So you rock. That's gonna be the theme since I started off with my high school rock band. So you rock. Thank you for everything. And we're going to talk next about one specific affiliate.
Thank you, Klaus. Take care.
Alrighty, so we're talking about Spokane, Washington. Spokane is a real interesting city. I've been there a number of times. It is the birthplace of Bing Crosby. It is the home of Gonzaga University. And it also hosted a World's Fair. And I remember going for a run when I was there, jogging through sort of the remnants of the World's Fair that's embedded in a park. So talking about Spokane, the affiliate in Spokane has done an incredible job in prevention and diversion work. And stepping back, a couple of years ago with Family Promise, we determined that if we wanted to increase our impact, it was not going to be by doing more shelter. We needed to become more holistic and diversify the actions we take. And we had affiliates doing all different sorts of work in prevention and diversion, but we made those really standard elements and really leaned into that. And the outcome of that is that our affiliates served more than 175,000 people last year and did incredible work in preventing homelessness and diverting families from shelter. And Spokane is right up at the front of those. And what happened is once ERAP came about, states recognized that our affiliates were outstanding resources to administrate that ERAP funding. So in Spokane, the city identified Family Promise Spokane to lead the effort for families with children, made available millions of dollars of funds. The affiliate in Spokane created a portal. And here's their day center. I was actually at the grand opening of this. This is an old supermarket. They turned that into a community drop-in center for all populations experiencing homelessness. So they have a great program for families, but this is a program for no barriers program for any families in the community that need shelter. So they created a portal that makes it possible for anyone in the community to go in, identify what kind of assistance they need, and then get connected to the agencies that provide that. So that is for everybody, and that's something that Family Promise Spokane created specifically around families. They've gotten nearly 1,200 applications since July. They've distributed $1.3 million in rental assistance to 198 households. They have about $500,000 left. The average amount distributed is $6,541. And think about it, this is back rent and front rent. So these are big bills. I mean, you know, look at some of the really high-priced areas. You're talking about families that are $15,000, $20,000 in arrears. So critically important to be able to have the funding to support that. And one of the key things about the portal is what we talked about earlier. We are dealing with a situation where access is so critical. There's so many obstacles around eligibility. Lowering those lets people get connected to the resources they need and gets the help to them quickly. Ultimately, they have served they've served nearly 700 people through this program who would otherwise be homeless, and they're going to double that in the next few weeks. And the last point I want to make is we've talked a lot in the past about the show about the inexorable connection between structural racism and family homelessness. And Spokane is a great illustration of this because Spokane it's in Washington State, but it's really a mountain west city and sort of shares cultural affinities with Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, more conservative, more libertarian, and more white. It's an 84% white city, yet the applicants have been 43% people of color, and 75% of them heads of household have been female. And that is an illustration of the disparity and the impacts of structural racism, gender discrimination on housing, right? On the inability to access housing wealth for populations of color, the inability to get pay equity for women manifests in more homelessness among those populations, something we absolutely have to be addressing. So I want to just give kudos to our affiliate in Spokane, Joe, the incredible director there, a great, great guy. Everybody on that team is fantastic for the work that they've done, and show a model of how if you allow local communities that are innovative, creative, dynamic to lead efforts, they will produce incredible results. And that's what our affiliates do, and that's what our affiliates are. So thanks to Family Promise of Spokane. And I think we're going to close out now with my my ending notes. All right, why it matters, right? Why does it matter? So I'm going to read a quote from a New York Times article. For all the technical issues, the success of the distribution program is likely to come down to a fundamental shift in thinking among state and local officials that keeping tenants in stable housing is not only a core function of the government, but a humanitarian necessity. And I would add to that, it is an economic necessity. Allowing housing instability to exist, families are bound by housing instability. If they're spending 50, 70% of their income on housing, they do not have the opportunity to change their situation, and they're always at the mercy of housing. Housing, in essence, is a human need. It's a human right, but it is also a market-based commodity. That's why you need to have regulation. That's why you need to have government influence on it, because otherwise we would have countless more people experiencing homelessness. And what the past couple of years have shown us is a few key points. One is that regulation, that management remains critically important. Another is that people have an understanding now of how essential housing is and how much housing is connected to wealth and economic well-being. The pandemic had us thinking about work from home, school from home, which leads to the obvious point. You have to have a home if you're going to do those things. And to the disparities of so many people, the fact that people that folks in the upward part of that K-shaped recession we're engaging with, waitress at the coffee shop, a motel clerk, a landscaper, were people at extreme risk of homelessness. Right? The pandemic pulled out their source of income underneath them. So we had to have interventions to keep those people from a health perspective, but of course from an economic and humanitarian perspective as well. And I'll end with this thought, which is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program costs nearly $47 billion. That is a lot of money, for sure. But it is a drop in the bucket compared to the societal costs by allowing housing instability, by allowing massive amounts of evictions to exist. There would be the costs in the health system. There would be the costs for so many interventions. And there's that cost of lost productivity, because when you allow families to experience homelessness, you are robbing those children of their futures. And we would be setting ourselves up for monumental costs now and monumental loss of productivity far into the future. So think about programs like ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, as incredible investments in all of our well-being, right? That's what we care about. That's what we want to see. So I'm going to end it there. I want to thank my incredible communications team. They rock, keeping with our rock band theme. John, thanks again for the great music. Everybody have a fantastic weekend, and look into your local state. What is your state doing with ERAP? What are the ways that we can address that? And we're going to be talking about affordable housing, which is the core issue here more in the future. Start learning about what your state's doing on affordable housing as well. But more to come on that. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.